we're going to just share some perspectives that we see in and around and and we're really hoping that you'll get something out of this that says, I need to do something different in my community. I need to take charge of our actions with our school district, our community, our school board, and make a difference. And hopefully we're going to give you some great ideas on how to do just that. Pat?
No, I would say I'd echo the same thing Jeff said, and I think, just thinking about last night, for instance, and having those award recipients come up and tell their stories and share their journeys, it's, to me and to all of us, that's a huge energizer. It may sound cheesy, but all of us at ICS have what we call a what's your why, and that is exactly why we do what we do and traipse all over the state of Minnesota and have for the last 2.5 decades. It's to be able to try to empower districts to make that change and positively impact their communities. And I think if we get anything through today, we just want to, convey some thoughts and have you reflect on some of the things we talk about, and hopefully some of them are applicable to the district.
So just a real brief overview of who we are and what we do. So ICS does a lot of school planning, design, construction management throughout the state of Minnesota. We have offices in Park Rapids, successful referendum, whoop for Park Rapids over there. Park Rapids, Duluth, Sauk Rapids, the Minneapolis office, Sioux Falls office, and Minneapolis office as well. So we really work throughout the greater Minnesota and our specialty really is rural schools, Alexandria as well as with Lori. Our experience, so Pat and I have been doing this a long time. And so when we were thinking about presenting, how do we give back? What do we do? How do we help? And I think we're hopefully going to have a message to this, and our guest speakers are going to be way better than Pat and I know you'll agree with that. But we're going to set it up for our guest speakers as we go through today. But a few things. We've been doing this for 25 years throughout Minnesota. Pat and I have probably done well over $1 billion in school project construction and planning in rural Minnesota schools. We've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it isn't easy. As all of you know, there's smiles in the room, those that have worked with us and have been through some really tough, challenging situations and projects. We're in the business of just making your classrooms a little bit better, but changing communities, big time. When we invest in schools and public education, we bring partners in and other community organizations in, we really strengthen the community for decades and decades. In some cases, we're changing schools and communities for the next century. A lot of our buildings have been there a very long time. And so when we have the opportunity to make those impacts, it's pretty passionate for us.
And I think one of the things, Jeff touched on it earlier, but when we started thinking about what kind of topic to have for today, we could have talked about making your facilities more efficient. We could have talked about better referendum communication. We could have talked about how best to leverage all the different funding buckets. But we wanted to try to think outside of our day-to-day direct box and really reflect on something that we see as kind of a systemic challenge for districts in rural Minnesota. And although what we go through may seem to simplify or generalize, there's a lot of impact that can happen for little or no cost and not as much energy as you might think. It's something that we think can hopefully really drive some impact with your districts.
One of the things that we find, and we get brought into a community to work on a bigger project or a referendum project, and what's the first thing? Well, how are we going to communicate? And what communication methods do you have set up already? What networks, where's your inside circle of community leaders? How well do you know them? Do you have coffee with them often, right? Or are we driving the bus because we don't have a bus driver, right? Today, more than ever, it is so challenging as leaders. I don't tell you guys this, you know this, but trying to keep your district together right now is so challenging. But I'm going to challenge you not to drive that bus. Don't drive that bus as that superintendent leader, right? Board members, don't say, good for you for driving that bus today. We got bigger issues. We need to talk positively about our school districts and about our community. Other people are telling the message about our community and we're letting them do it. We can't do that when we're driving the bus. Got to get out and talk about our communities and connect with our leaders in our communities. Apologize if you guys are driving the bus and I'm taking a shot at you, right? Because I know you're also trying to keep things together and keep things moving forward. How do schools benefit from communities? Well, this is simple stuff, right? Any one of you guys can talk through this. Well, schools benefit big time from the communities that you serve. Right? The workforce for the community is coming from the school. Right? The future entrepreneurs of the communities are from the students that you're teaching every day. The advice from business leaders to help guide what curriculum we should be teaching our kids, right? And the connections and career pathways and all of this really can have a positive impact on how our schools benefit from our communities. We forget about the connection between the school and our communities because we're so focused on our everyday thing that we're trying to do and make our students better and keep the buses going and deal with COVID and everything else. But we can't forget about the connections we have with our communities and our community leaders. And when you take a step back and you look at the educators, the first few months of COVID, educators and healthcare workers were celebrated. Holy cow, we know how hard your teachers had to work, remote learning. The medical workers were praised, and people shouted from the rooftops of New York City, thanking our professionals. Where are we at today? Let's beat them up with discussions and distractions about vaxxing and masks and critical race theory and oh my gosh, all this negativity and challenges coming at you, right? Don't forget to tell your story. Don't forget to talk about all these great things. Again, as Pat mentioned yesterday, how powerful that was to hear those stories about education, right? And you all have them. But we don't always talk about them. We don't have time to talk about them. We're too busy to talk about them, right? Relationships with our newspapers, right? I was at a session earlier, Noel Schmidt's in the back of the room. He said, the way this news article was written, sometimes dreams come true. Written by the Mesabi Daily News. Who wrote this story?
Walt Disney.
Dr. Schmidt wrote this story and handed it to the newspaper and said, I got a great story. When we pass this baby, dreams come true. That headline came from the superintendent. It was proactive in telling that story and that message, beating them to the story. Don't let them tell the story for you. Let's give some examples. Schools are the driving force for a prosperous community. The key to a successful community starts with quality public education. We know that. That's why we're all in the room, right? I'm going to read that again. The key to a successful community starts with quality public education. Right? There's perceptions versus realities, and we all have been here through this, right? Let's talk about perception versus reality. Perception. Here's an example of somebody from outside your community telling the story about your community. Red Lake Falls. How many people have heard of Red Lake Falls, Minnesota? Article is written. Anybody know this article written about, see somebody in the back? Yep, a couple people. I call this place America's worst place to live. Red Lake Falls is the worst place, the absolute worst place to live in America. What's the reality? Red Lake Falls is a beautiful place, right? Now I could stand up here and I could say, whatever community you live in, greater Minnesota is the worst place to live, and I could write a great story. This can happen to any one of us. What do you do about it? What do you do about it? How do you get out front of it? Because you know that picture right there is any one of our communities that we live in. We must not allow other people's perceptions to paint our community. Right? Let's be proactive and get out and tell our story and all the great things we have to say. So let's do a little welcome to Red Lake Falls, Minnesota, ranked America's worst place to live. And I'd like to introduce to you guys the person that wrote that story that said Red Lake Falls is the worst place to live. We have guest speakers here from Red Lake Falls. Chris and Briana, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and take over the stage.
So, my name is Chris Ingraham. I am a former reporter for the Washington Post. I will get into that briefly. And in 2015, I wrote kind of an infamous story for the Post on how Red Lake County, Minnesota, ranked dead last in this federal data set of natural beauty. And so at the Post, I was a data reporter, right? Like data was my bread and butter. That's what I did. And I was just, it was a summer afternoon. It was a lazy afternoon, and I was looking for stuff to write about. And I kind of stumble across this data set from the federal government. People are like, oh, you just made that up. I didn't make this up. This was a real thing that the federal government spent your taxpayer dollars putting together. But they were studying rural issues. And they were trying to understand better rural migration and why people were moving out of rural areas. And one of the things they suspected was that like the quality of the environment in an area was one of those factors. So they did, this is kind of a crazy project. It's ridiculous that anyone did this, but they basically tried to rank every single county in the country on its natural beauty. So they looked at things like average temperature, like hilliness, topography, availability of water and lakes. Basically all the things that we think of what makes a place a nice place to live. And they kind of took all this stuff and they mashed it up in a statistical blender, and it kind of spat out the results. And the most desirable place to live in America by this metric was Santa Barbara County in California, the mountains and the hillsides. And then you look at the least desirable place in America, and it's a place where it's cold and flat, and all these other things. And it ended up that Red Lake County in northwest Minnesota ended up being at the very bottom of the list. So one of the things that we've been talking about here is how communities tell their own story. So I was writing this story, and I'm from upstate New York. I lived in DC and Baltimore. I know nothing about the Midwest or northern Minnesota at all. So what is one of the first things I do in writing the story? I see that, okay, this little podunk county called Red Lake whatever is dead last. I want to write about them. I need to find out something about them, right? People are going to be like, what the heck's a Red Lake County? So I go looking for information, and I go to Google, which is where everyone goes to find out about your counties or your places when they're looking them up. And of course, Google takes me to the Red Lake County website. And I'm like, cool, okay, maybe I'll get there'll be some local color, farming community. I had no idea what to expect. But maybe there's something what is it that makes Red Lake County special? Surely its website will tell me. And the website had a very late 90s kind of aesthetic, it had a community calendar that hadn't been updated since 2011. It was very kind of not a whole lot going on. But I see on their website they have a fun facts section. And I'm like, yes, okay, so I can find out what their largest ball of twine or whatever it is, whatever they're proud of. So their fun fact about Red Lake County, there were 3 of them, and the top listed one was, and I kid you not, dead serious, it is on the website to this day. Red Lake County is the only landlocked county in the country that is surrounded by just 2 adjacent counties. That is what passes for a fun fact in northwest Minnesota. Now, as a data geography guy, I was kind of into I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of pretty cool. But from just a normal human being standpoint, I'm like, okay, so there's literally nothing going on here. So this is middle of nowhere. Clearly these people barely have the internet. They probably don't even read. They're not going to read this story, so I'm just going to write whatever I want. Who cares? And of course, I ended up being extremely mistaken on that point because I ended up writing the story, Minnesotans took a lot of offense at this characterization of Red Lake County. And it wasn't just people from northwest Minnesota, it was people from all over the state just up in arms that anywhere in Minnesota could possibly rank dead last in a federal beauty pageant. One of the really interesting things, and this stuck out to me right away as I started getting the barrage of hate mail and everything after I published the story. Very polite hate mail, I should say, extremely polite. But there were a whole bunch of other places in the country that kind of came out bad, right? A whole bunch of flat, cold places, all along the Red River Valley, in North Dakota too. There's Red River Valley in North Dakota, not a lot going on there. Places in Iowa, a lot of places in the Midwest. I did not hear a single peep from anybody living in those areas. It was only the Minnesotans who got upset and let me hear about it. So I ended up writing about it. I ended up, and what happened, and again, talking about telling stories, is after the initial publication, a band of folks from the community got together and they reached out to me and they're like, hey, you know, there's been, cause there's kind of like this little mini media firestorm, because it was like August, there's nothing going on. So like it was a perfect August diversion for everyone. You know, all the local regional press picked up on it. And some folks from the county, they wrote to me and they're like, you know, you should really come out here and visit. I think you should actually come and see and, you know, put the post's money where your mouth is, basically, and see and come and take a look on the ground and see if the reality matches whatever is in your Excel file. And I was like, okay, sure. So, you know, I ended up going out and visiting. And long story short, I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but I ended up loving the place. And I ended up loving it so much that I moved my whole family out here the following year. And, you know, I just want to say, so as part of like that, as coming out and visiting, the folks in the county, they put together this tour and they got to get together with a whole bunch of other folks from around the county, not just Red Lake Falls, but like some of the other small towns like Oakley and Plummer. And they all kind of got together and they thought and they talked and brainstormed about what makes this place special and what do we want to show this guy. And so they showed me schools and eateries and you know, the landscape was very nice. And one of the weird things that people kept saying to me through that trip as they were going around is they're like, man, you know, and this was the locals telling me this, they're like, man, I had no idea this place was actually here, or I had no idea these guys were here, or I had no idea that there was so much in this county. And this was really weird to me because I figured like everybody from rural county like knows each other and hangs out all the time or something, right? But like I kind of started to understand that, you know, people, you know, even in small rural areas, they just kind of get in their own grind and they often you can lose track of what makes your community or your area special.
Last week that Red Lake County was the worst in the nation. The Washington Post reporter who wrote that story toured Red Lake Falls this afternoon.
Christopher Ingraham based his article on USDA statistics that showed Red Lake County was the worst in the nation, ranked on climate and scenery. Valley News Team's Neil Carlson shows us how folks there are already changing his mind.
Christopher Ingraham's first stop was at the historic Red Lake County Courthouse, where he was greeted by the school's drumline.
Been to Minnesota before?
No, I have not. This is my very first time.
All right. Do you think it's going to be tough to defend the thesis of your article that this is the worst county in America?
Yeah, I think I might have some trouble with that. It was a pretty nice drive out here.
For the next 2 days, folks around here will be showing Ingraham scenery like this. They're betting it means more national media attention and tourism gold. Ingraham will get the full tour, including a kayak trip down the river, trail rides, farm tours, and a look at surrounding towns.
Oh, we're going to show them how beautiful Red Lake Falls is and why it's a nice place to live.
Okay. Think it's going to be tough for him to defend his thesis that this is the worst county in America?
I think so. Everyone that comes here, tubing, camping, loves it. So
You think you're going to get a few $1,000 free worth of the tourism advertising out of it?
That's what we're hoping for. You know, we're already kind of planning, you know, to try to do some stuff for the county here or whatever. So hopefully we can get some people in here.
It appears Christopher Ingraham's opinion of Red Lake County is already changing just as his tour begins.
Might even call it beautiful. I don't know. We'll have to see. Yeah.
So after your tour is done in the next 2 days, I mean, do you plan an article on this again? What it looks like here
it's
and
going
the
to be a
people?
follow-up. I'm taking all sorts of pictures, hopefully talk to all sorts of people. So yeah, we'll definitely, I'm going to take this back to DC and take another look at the data.
From Red Lake Falls, Minnesota, Neil Carlson, Valley News Live.
And at this hour, Ingraham is at TJ's Sports Bar in Red Lake Falls for a meet and greet, happy hour, and a little dinner.
So this is slightly embarrassing. I don't know if you noticed, but I think I'm actually wearing the same shirt right now that I was in that. This is like my one nice shirt. It's my go out and talk to people in Minnesota shirt, apparently. Okay, maybe it was a different color. Yeah. It's funny. So they like took me on a bus tour of the county and everything. The first place that they brought me, and I understood after the fact that this was kind of a bit of hazing, they brought me to a dairy farm. And they took me, they wanted to take me into the barn and like get my shoes all dirty and everything. And they thought I would have like a typical fancy East Coast guy reaction, like all grossed out. Like there were actually a number of camera crews with us, and one of the cameramen, he tried to follow us into the barn, but he couldn't. He ended up running back and retching because like the smell was too strong for him. But they didn't know that my father is a veterinarian. He was a large animal veterinarian, so I spent a lot of time on farms growing up. And so I loved the smells and everything. So, you know, when I made it through the barn without barfing and I actually pet a cow, I think I earned a lot of credibility with that crowd. So yeah, and so this is all happening, like this trip that I was taking, it's happening at kind of a weird time in our lives back in DC, because we were dealing with crushing commutes and time crunches, you know, so I'm commuting 90 minutes one way to work every day. So 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week, just massive commutes. Briana was working for the federal government for Social Security, so very demanding job. We had just had twins, so we had twin 2-year-olds running around the house. Our tiny, 900 square foot row house. 900 square foot, by the way, spread across 4 stories. So it's like all stairs. It's basically a toddler death trap, right? And like we had to move, but the problem was like cost of living out there, just insane. We couldn't afford everything. And so we're looking around and, you know, batting ideas forth, trying to figure out what to do. And so right as this is going on, I ended up taking this trip to this like Norman Rockwellian community in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, this is what's been missing from our lives. This is what we need. And so we ended up, you know, having a lot of conversations and moving out there back in 2016. And we are still here, by the way. We are still in Red Lake Falls, Minnesota. I want to say, you know, one of the most common question I would get up until and after the book coming out is, so when are you guys moving back? Because like everyone just assumed like it was kind of a stunt for the book or whatever, right? Like I'd write my book and then go back or whatever. So I want to point out that as of this June, I no longer write for the Washington Post. I went off and started my own publication, a newsletter publication called The Y-Axis. So I can say officially that my relationship with Minnesota has outlasted my relationship with the Washington Post. I just want to say a couple brief things about, you know, the why we came. That's all like in the book. The book is called If You Lived Here, You'd Be Home by Now. We released it a couple years ago. But I want to talk very briefly about why we're staying, because the schools are a huge part of that. And so the number one reason is the schools by far, or I should say school singular, because there's just one school in town, right? And that's actually a great thing, and a lot of people don't understand this. In like Maryland and DC, there was this whole kind of like, and in big urban and suburban areas, there's this kind of arms race between parents of getting into the right school district, right? You have to buy your house in the right neighborhood and send your kid to the right preschool, to the right elementary school, to blah, 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 until your kid graduates from Harvard and becomes a doctor and you have won at the game of life, right? Like it's very high stakes, very fraught stuff. Out here in Red Lake Falls, we don't have to worry about that. There's one school, everybody goes there. And it's actually, and I'm dead serious about this, it is tremendously liberating to not have to think about all of that school choice stuff, to just be like, hey, this is our school, the entire community is invested in it. We all know this school, everybody goes here. It's not a question, it's not a subject of debate. It's one less hassle to deal with in your life. And I think that's something that's really overlooked, because in so many areas, a lot of people are just, you know, it's such a huge part of life. But not having to choose, man, it's a really strong thing, and it's a relief for a lot of parents. The school situation also became important to us for kind of an unexpected reason as well. Not long after we moved here, one of our twins, who were 4 or 5 at the time, was diagnosed with autism. And this was like a big deal, right? Because it was the first thing that made us kind of think like, uh-oh, maybe this isn't gonna work. You know, maybe the community is not gonna have the kind of services and everything that, you know, he needs to be able to live his life to the fullest. So we were kind of surprised when we were talking it over with the autism specialist, who didn't know anything about our situation. We ended up going back to Maryland to the Kennedy Krieger Center at Johns Hopkins, where the kids were born, just to like, you know, make sure we got all our bases covered and understood what was going on. And the doctors there, and they were some of the best in the world, and they like didn't know anything about our situation. And we were asking him like, okay, so what does he need? What can we give for him? They're like, honestly, the best thing would be to be in kind of a regular classroom in a small school where everybody knows him and there's a lot of social support and community and caring. And they're like, but that's kind of a hard thing to find these days. And we were kind of like, well, you're not gonna believe this, but that is exactly what we have where we live now. And one final thought I want to leave you with is I've talked to a lot of folks in small communities like mine across Minnesota, and they're often like, well, what can we do to get more people to live here? You know, a lot of folks in greater Minnesota are kind of down about their towns, and they're like, oh, nobody wants to live here, everyone wants to move away. And the thing I always stress is that you already have what a lot of people want. If you look at survey data parsing where people live and where they wish they lived, there are millions upon millions upon millions of people living in cities and suburbs right now who you ask them where they would prefer to live, they all want to live in small towns and cities. There's a huge amount of pent-up demand for small town and rural living all over the country. And, you know, it seems like we often think of this as kind of a one-way street where, you know, kids, they grow up in a town like Red Lake Falls, and then they move out, they graduate high school, and they move down to Minneapolis, and that's it, they're gone. And I think what we're seeing more and more of, and certainly the pandemic has probably accelerated this, is that once those kids start hitting, say, 30 or 40 or so, and they start having kids of their own, and they start thinking back on their own childhoods, and they remember those open spaces and the big lawns, and they looked at their cramped city apartments, and they're like, geez, how am I going to make this work here? So there's just a huge demand for the kind of small schools and everything that communities offer. Now, there is another big reason that we're staying here, and that's the community of people in Red Lake Falls. But this is kind of a weird thing for me to talk about personally, because if you know me, I'm kind of a hermit by nature. I actually don't really like other people. One of the draws, honestly, for me, coming to northern Minnesota, is that there's no people there. It's awesome. I love it. However, even I, like a misanthrope like myself, I could tell that there was something special about the community. And so in order to sell my wife on the idea, my wife, by the way, who more than anything else in the world hates the cold, in order to sell her on the idea of moving to one of the coldest places in the lower 48, I kind of sold her on the community. And she is, she's a much more social person than me, much more involved in the community. And so that, I'm going to turn this over to Briana Ingraham, who, now let me know which of these I have right and wrong, who is in just a few short years of living there, she is a member of the Red Lake Falls City Council. She is the vice mayor. She is the former director of the Northwest Minnesota Arts Council, former director, former president of Zalian's Women's Group in Thief River Falls. Yes, former president. And most importantly, now she is actually a high school English teacher at Lafayette High School in Red Lake Falls. So here's my wife, Briana.
Oops. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, so we're going to switch a little bit. And so I won't go over our story here. He told it pretty well. I did have a lot of reservations about coming. We visited in March to look for housing. It was not a Maryland March, so I didn't have the greatest impression at first, but the people really were the ones that drew me in. And it took a little bit to get my feet wet here, but they knew that I think the community really wanted to engage me so that I wasn't sitting idle. And they did reach out to me with all the different things that I could be involved in and be a part of. And it was through that, with kids at home, when I was a stay-at-home mom, got to spend some time with my twins, and then the little one came along, so got a lot of time with them, that I learned about the school needing the changes. The referendum was coming up, and they needed some help on that aspect. So I was all in, because I really firmly believe that, you know, your education is so important, and a child's education is very important. Came from a small town in upstate New York myself. I graduated with 18 seniors. So a small school was something I was very familiar with. I knew the benefits of that one-on-one, and I was getting some stories from the best people to give the story. My 6-year-old came home to tell me, Mommy, we learned a really cool thing today at school. We learned why a cat meows. And I said, oh, well, why does a cat meow? Well, actually, I don't know. It was so loud, I could hear all the other classes that I don't know what the answer is. And so it was hearing their tales of, oh, I don't have enough time to eat lunch because they have to get us outside because the cafeteria is also the gym. And so we have to get it all done so the next kids can come in so that then we can have some inside time when it's 40 below. So these stories were coming back from my little ones, and I began to realize that, you know, we really needed to pass the referendum. And being involved with the community, I was able to reach out and work with others to make that happen. But I also engaged my sons and wanted to involve them as much as I could. So the neighbor and I, we had been talking about ways that we could help get the word out. And we made these huge signs that went out in front of the houses. And as you can see, my little one was 2 at the time. They all put their handprints on as we did these little signs that we put up out front to get the word out. I also wanted to tell my story in the newspaper. And although he was writing for the Post at the time, I decided to write a letter to the editor as well and explain all these things. And I talked with folks. I took a page out of his book and went up to the coffee clutches and talked with them. Well, why don't you want to see this referendum pass? What are the issues here going on? So in talking with people, it was, you know, some of them were getting close to retirement and they didn't want to have this huge tax thing that was going to go on for a long time. And so I was like, okay, here's what we need to do. So I wrote a letter to the editor in the paper with my name on it, not his, and explaining that, you know, that investment that you make in the school is going to last a lifetime. What's the number one question a new family asks when they get to an area and when they want to live? What are the schools like? And if you can turn around and say, well, we just invested in this school, and look at this. It's got a nice gym where they can go when it's 40 below. It's got a cafeteria that's big enough to house them all at the same time. It's got an art room so they aren't on art on a cart, and a music room so they aren't playing music lessons in the alcoves. You know, that little teeny tiny space between the outdoor and the indoor doors, and hats and heaters. All of that went into this article, as well as the investment that, hey, maybe your kids won't take your grandkids and it's a couple states away. If the school was good, they'd stay close, and then you wouldn't have to sell and move. They'd want to come back. They want to be here. So writing that article, getting out, another one that we did is, this one here is my favorite one. We made signs, the boys and I, and we went out on our corner. We're on the main street there, and we would go out and get cars to honk for us, right? Talking with them and bringing the issue to them, making it understandable to them at what was at stake, that they couldn't vote, but they needed people to vote for them, involving these kids in a way that they could understand. And then you know what the great thing was? Just this past fall, everything is now built, and it's beautiful, brand new building. They've got an art room, they've got a music room, they've got a gym and a cafeteria. We've invested in this school that's now going to serve not only my kids, but the kids to come. And my boys, when we were going on the tour, when we went into the art room and they got to see this neat place where they were going to get to paint and draw. And I said, do you remember when we went out and we were holding up those signs for the cars and getting people to honk and getting the word out? You helped build this room. You all helped build this room. You're a part of this. So even the youngest, even the littlest can be involved and be a part of telling the story that should be told. Right? They're the ones who are in it every day. They see it and they know it. And in fact, on election day, when we were telling them we were going to bring them with us, I said, how do you want us to vote? We've got this election coming up and we're going to go vote. My one son said, well, why can't I vote? I said, well, you know, you're not quite old enough. Yeah, but I know how to read, and I know what my school needs, and I want to vote. I said, oh, okay. You can come in that booth with me, but until you're 18, we got to do it this way. So you tell me how you want me to vote, and I will vote that way. So bringing the message to the kids and having them a part of that conversation also helps spread the news on what it is that's so important. And then it raises them up to be members of the community who want to stay invested and want to continue to do the good things that need to be done. With the schools referendum getting passed, my next step, of course, ended up being COVID. I homeschooled for a year, so these guys got the pleasure of having just me as their teacher for second grade. And then I was able to go on to join Lafayette High School as their new English teacher. And through that, I have continued this mission of trying to have the kids tell the tale. And I think there was another speaker here talking about getting the kids involved in writing for the paper, right? So they don't have to do, one, we don't have a newsletter yet at our school. So I offer it as extra credit to have the school, if, hey, you want your name in the paper? We just had this great event, right? Homecoming. We had homecoming. Write an article about homecoming to tell the broader community what's going on. And don't just tell them about homecoming, but tell them that, you know what, COVID did kind of throw a wrench in this. COVID made it so our competitors, the opponents, they weren't able to come to the game. But the school was able to find a solution. What's that solution that they found? Well, they instead had a scrimmage from 5th grade to 12th grade boys, all joining together and then split up, so that the little kids got to play with their role models, the big kids, with all the parents there in the pouring rain. But they played, and that's the story that we wrote. That's the story that we wrote, was how the school was able to find a solution, and this went out in the regular paper that everybody in the community gets. All the different things the school is doing, you know, that maybe not seem like the greatest headlines of the day, but you know what? It made the front page, and it made the 2 kids who wrote the article feel pretty good too. So there are things that we can be doing to tell the right story so that somebody else doesn't tell the tale. Because it really does, these small communities are a draw and are someplace that people want to be, where they want to raise their boys, even if it's 40 below, 7 months out of the year.
I hear about that a lot. I get personally blamed for it.
I heard that it was a nice winter last year, right? It was, this year is going to be worse, but there are definitely things that we can be doing and involving, you know, all aspects of our community in that process, so that when it does come time for the referendum, and I say when, not if, right? Our schools are always going to need to be reinvested in, just like you do with your house when it needs a new roof. Always have to be reinvesting in that. So the when it comes up, you've got news that you can draw on. And people are remembering, oh yeah, the school, yes, of course, they do these wonderful things for these kids, right? They're always looking for solutions. The things that you all do every single day, you're constantly learning how to be flexible and you know, moving with everything, especially in COVID. Share those good news stories. Write the articles yourself. If you don't have a newspaper that has a staff to be on all of this, our town is very small. A lot of people just write the articles themselves and send them in because she doesn't have time enough to get a reporter out everywhere. Write the articles yourself. Those stories that you don't think are newsworthy, they are for your community. And they're the ones that are going to be in the back of their mind when the next referendum comes around. So I think that's, I don't know if we want to turn it back to these fine gentlemen. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
So just to dovetail off of what was just talked about, we wanted to at least present some scenarios with you based on a few of the districts that we currently work with, and kind of give you some scenarios to react to and give you a feel for what we're dubbing District A as a reactive district and District B, which is a proactive district. Again, the hope is that we're able to just relay some of these concepts and let you reflect and see what might make sense to you. So District A continually struggles with getting any kind of active community engagement. They have poor capacity and attendance at their sporting events. They have little or no interest at all in any of their activities. They've got below average student participation in any of their activities or events. Parent-teacher conferences are lackluster at best. And so they've got some issues and some challenges to deal with. The relationship with the local newspaper in this district has always been a challenge to them. More often than not, there's negative letters to the editor or negative editorials in the paper related to any current challenges or issues or things that the district is dealing with. They've got a current fundraising opportunity for a playground that they've been trying to replace for probably 6-8 years now at an absolute standstill. They've talked to all the local business owners, some of the big farmers, some wealthy individuals and families, and they're really not getting anywhere. Board meetings in this district tend to be extremely chaotic, to probably paint it well. They've got board members who are repetitively absent. Their meetings are always very, very long and disorganized. They've very typically got some negative people from the community giving public comment, especially in the last couple of years with all of the fun challenges that you guys are all facing and dealing with. And you've got a superintendent and the high school principal who are doing everything they possibly can to try to get through some of the challenges on a day-to-day basis. This is one instance where not the superintendent, but the high school principal was actually out driving bus. And obviously that's been an issue with districts lately trying to find drivers, but where should that principal be? It's a great thing he's willing to drop what he's doing and drive bus, but he's got a school to lead and he's got staff and teachers that need his help and focus on education. So they've got a district website very similar to the city of Red Lake Falls, evidently, in that it is extremely outdated. There's no way of having anyone from the district track what's going well, what people are looking at, what they're not looking at. Very disheveled. And back to the board meetings, it's you know, every board meeting that I've attended in this district, I leave just feeling tired or negative. It's just got this aura to it, and it's just something that clearly isn't healthy for the district. Now let's look at the flip side. So District B, in no particular order, but this district has gone to great lengths to try to continuously reinforce and strengthen their connection with the community. One of the things that was alluded to a couple times today is that districts tend to think about communicating and reaching out to the community when they need something, right? Oh, we've got to pass an operating levy this fall, we better start communicating. And that cyclical pattern of trying to forge that connection only when you're needing to ask for something is something that I think community members are wise to, right? It's something that needs to happen continuously. They've got an active PTO committee, they've got community members, they've got their principals, they've got 1 or 2 board members that sit on it. They meet on a monthly basis. That entire group has got a real strong pulse on all of the initiatives that are happening in the district, all of the challenges that are happening in the district. They work together to try to talk through things. And by default, that group really ends up being a conduit back to the greater community and their 2 communities in sharing the goods and the bads of the district so that people are aware. They've also got a lot of programs and events that they do on an ongoing basis. The superintendent, once a week, is at the local cafe doing a soup with the soup. Folks come in just to chat, to answer or ask questions, but in reality, I've sat in on a couple of them and they're there to visit. And people will sit there for 2 hours sometimes and just chat with no real topic in mind. They've got a monthly taco in the bag family night. I've been to one of these where they actually have book giveaways and family games, and again, nothing that costs a lot of money, it doesn't take a lot of time, but it's a huge community connector for this district. They've got seniors that come in and do reading programs at their elementary wing, and it's absolutely loved by both the seniors and the elementary kids. A few times, I think it's 2 or 3 times a year, they've got future artist nights where they display all of the student artwork and have the community come in for an open house, let the kids, you know, describe what they've done and present their drawings and paintings or whatever else they've created. They've got a community garden that they work together on. Local radio station, which may not be there very much longer, but actually is student council reps every so often actually come in and they sing the praises of some of the most recent student achievements and activities. And again, it's just another way to connect with the community. Board meetings here are night and day to the other district. Well organized, well run. Everyone's on task. They're extremely efficient. They've got a standing agenda item called Community Connection or something where every board member takes the time to talk about what activities or events they went to, what they liked, and so on. They've got a program with local businesses that is called Ask the Experts, where they bring in people from local businesses or local experts to present to their kids. Website is great, full of analytics. And they also offer, I think this was halted during COVID, but they've got free attendance for seniors at all of their events. Again, not a huge deal, but what a great way to get people tied back to the district from the community. So again, not saying all of these will fit in your scenarios, but to just think through some of those and what may make a big impact.
It's interesting as you look at the list, we've all been on both sides or seen districts on both sides of the proactive and reactive, and we've all been there, right? The proactive things are so simple to do, right? Now, one person can't do it all on their own. It needs to be a collective team. It can't just be one superintendent going to make all this happen. And as superintendents come and go from district to district, you may lose something good that you had going. These have to happen over time. It has to be sustainable long term. It needs to be a commitment by board members, by principals, by parents, right? It isn't easy, but it is easy, right? And it starts by just a few people making it happen and making a difference, just like our guest speakers and what they have done to help their community be better and better and transform their school into something great for their children.
And it doesn't have to happen all at once. It's, you know, the first one, I won't read through these, but you can see them up there. Establish some goals, establish priorities. Maybe some of those things you heard are issues that you may or may not want to admit, but they're happening in your district that can be resolved. Maybe some of those good things from the second district, the proactive district, can be implemented over time. And I think if I reflect on the Red Lake Falls scenario, and my theory is that, you know, I think we're all Minnesota nice. I think we get to the point where we're pretty humble and timid about bragging about the good things that happen. And when we do that, we become victims to all of the people that are hypercritical or are chomping at the bit to have public comment at the board meetings or to write a negative letter to the editor. We've got to somehow get out of our shells and become a little proud about all of the good things that are happening. They're happening out there. They're just being kind of sheltered and overheard by some of the negative things going on and all the distractions right now.
One of the things that we often find when we're working with a school district for a referendum or something, we've got to start to communicate our plan and our tax information and all of that. How are we going to do that, right? Well, maybe we need to hire, you know, Jake and his team created me $10,000 video. Oh, geez. We need a brochure mailed out to every taxpayer. Oh, right? Our school board's like, you got to be kidding me. Oh, my God, right? Where is our budget, folks, for communicating to our taxpayers all the time, not just when we're trying to pass something, not when we're trying to get into the wallet of our communities? Where's our budgets for communication, outreach, engagement, all the time, not just when we're asking?
Imagine our jobs, well, my job, quite frankly, in that proactive district versus the reactive district. When it came to communicating their need and to going out and talking about why it made sense to support the plan, they were practically, we got this. They had the chain of communication, they had the people, they had the enthusiasm, they had all of those connections. It was just inherent to their community and their district. In the reactive case, it took 3 times to get an operating levy renewal passed. It's night and day, and it's because the first one is clearly cyclical at best. The second one, call it utopia, but it's a well-oiled machine, and it doesn't take a lot of energy for them because they've gotten to the point where they've transitioned from reactive to proactive, and they're not running around putting out fires. They're actually pretty planful and mindful about how they're exerting their energy and what they're doing next.
When we're involved in a school, and we're pretty passionate about what we do, we learn so much about your community and about your district. We do listening sessions and people will just gush about the great things that are happening in your schools. And the great stories, whether it's teachers or parents or community folks, they'll just tell you, like, oh my God, let me tell you about our community. Let me tell you about our school. Let me tell you about my story of my child, right? We hear them. And I met with the newspaper, Carrie Leiter's familiar with this district that I worked in, met with the newspaper because they kept writing these negative stories about the school district. Say, hey, we got 7 really positive stories the community has no idea about the good things happening in this district. Here's great stories to write. And what they say? That doesn't sell newspapers. We're not going to print those stories. You've got to. You've got to tell those stories. They're missed all the time. They're missed. There's so many more than we heard last night all over greater Minnesota. So I really encourage you to tell your stories.
So this is kind of a rhetorical question, and it relates obviously to what we've been rambling about here, but honestly, we've got to get out from under the shell of all of the distractions right now and try to forge those connections and strengthen things. In the end, it makes things so much more easy to make forward progress.